Under the glare of fluorescent lights, she was stopped, not because her pass was invalid, but because her skin was. "Ma'am, this line is for first class only," the agent snapped, holding her in place like a suspect, not a passenger. Her boarding pass said 1A. No one scanned it. No one cared. The man behind her, white, smiling, late, was welcomed through without a glance. She was pulled aside like a threat. No shouting. No slurs. Just protocol. Just policy. Just enough doubt to humiliate her in public. And just enough silence to make it seem normal. But what no one realized, not the crew, not the gate manager, not even the man now reclining in the seat she paid for, was that this woman had built the very system they were trying to weaponize against her. She wasn't here to complain. She was here to watch them collapse in real time. What would you do if it were you standing in her place? Have you ever seen bias with a mask of procedure? Like this video, hit subscribe for the full story and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And which moment makes your blood boil? This isn't just a flight. It's a battlefield. And someone just triggered the wrong passenger. Celeste Monroe adjusted the collar of her soft gray coat as she stepped out of the Grand Hudson Hotel, a discreet smile tucked beneath her calm expression. The city was still waking up, the morning light just breaking across the skyline, brushing against the polished windows of the black luxury shuttle waiting for her at the curb. She had reserved the ride the night before, a premium transfer through the airline's VIP partnership program, automatic with her tier, no questions asked. But as she approached, the driver didn't move to open the door. Instead, he peered at her, hesitated, and then glanced down at his tablet. After a pause too long to be comfortable, he stepped forward and asked, "Ma'am, are you with one of the guests?" Celeste blinked once, not surprised, but disappointed. "I booked this vehicle," she replied, presenting the confirmation QR code. The driver's eyes scanned it quickly, then furrowed. "I was told to expect a first-class passenger. You're staying here?" he asked, tone dipped in disbelief. Celeste didn't flinch. Suite 1902. Under Monroe. His face stiffened. Right. Sorry. Just, a mix-up, I guess. Most housekeepers come out through the back." That was when she understood. He hadn't seen the confirmation. He had seen her skin, her posture, her lack of visible designer branding, and assumed she wasn't the passenger. Without a word, Celeste stepped into the shuttle and fastened her seatbelt. The driver said nothing for the rest of the ride. The tension didn't ease as they arrived at the private entrance of the airport's VIP terminal. A uniformed airline representative stood outside with a tablet, greeting passengers as they exited their vehicles. A middle-aged white couple stepped out of the car in front of her and were instantly welcomed. "Mr. and Mrs. Turner, welcome back," the attendant smiled. "Zurich again?" The couple laughed lightly, basking in the recognition. Celeste stepped forward next, poised and professional. She handed over her passport and e-ticket. The attendant barely looked at her before his eyes darted back to the screen. "I'm sorry, this lane is for premium travelers only," he said. "You might want to try the main terminal." Celeste didn't react emotionally. Instead, she gestured calmly at the pass on her phone. "I believe you'll see I'm listed under Priority Black, Code C. Direct boarding, Zurich." The man scanned it with his device. The screen lit green. His smile didn't return. "System glitch," he muttered, handing it back. "Proceed." It wasn't the words that stung, it was the reflex. The way her presence didn't match what he'd been trained to expect. The subtle dissonance between her credentials and what his biases had written into his instincts. She moved past him without another glance. Inside the terminal, she approached the biometric verification gates, glass partitions lined with scanners and cameras designed to streamline premium travelers without friction. It was supposed to be a marvel of modern convenience. Celeste stepped forward, looked into the lens, and waited. A soft tone beeped. Then another. The gate stayed closed. Verification failed. A robotic voice echoed. A nearby staffer approached, young and clearly uncomfortable. "Sorry, ma'am. Sometimes the system struggles with lighting. We'll just have to do a manual override." He entered a code and waved her through. "All set." Celeste nodded slightly but made no comment. She wasn't interested in the apology. She was noting the pattern. On her way through the lounge corridor, she passed a mirror-lined wall and caught her own reflection for a split second. Impeccably dressed, subtle makeup, a tablet case tucked under her arm, posture flawless. Everything about her screamed capability. And yet, at every checkpoint, someone had looked at her and seen someone who didn't belong. Not for a reason they could say aloud, but for one they all felt. When she arrived at the premium check-in desk for luggage verification, the agent behind the counter was engaged in light banter with another couple. The man was wearing joggers, the woman in athleisure. They laughed over having packed too many shoes again. The agent cooed, "Don't worry, we'll make it work. Just tell Zurich we gave you extra space." When it was Celeste's turn, the laughter stopped. The agent's expression flattened. "Do you have your booking number and government-issued ID?" she asked. Celeste handed both without pause. "Flying first?" the agent questioned. "Yes," Celeste replied evenly. "Priority 1. Monroe, Celeste." The agent typed for a moment, then said, "You'll need to step to the side for a second security verification. Random screening." Celeste raised an eyebrow slightly but didn't protest. She knew it wasn't random. It was routine for people like her. In the side area, a second attendant walked over and checked her documents again. "It says here you've flown over 200,000 miles with us in the past year," he noted. "That's impressive." "I like efficiency," Celeste answered. "And quiet." The man offered a half smile but didn't meet her eyes. When the process was finally complete, Celeste picked up her luggage and walked toward the final gate lounge. Before she reached it, she paused and opened her calendar on her tablet. Her agenda was tightly packed. Zurich today, Geneva tomorrow. Quiet meetings, quieter impact. She scrolled past the day's final entry, marked in red, Phase 1 observation, Orion Airlines domestic ethics checkpoint. She had officially begun her silent audit. Every interaction since stepping out of the hotel was now documented, not in anger, but as evidence. For months, her foundation had received anonymous complaints about racial bias within this airline's premium service structure. But data wasn't enough. She wanted patterns, and patterns required presence. Hers. In the lounge, the host asked again, just to confirm, "Are you flying alone today, MS?" "Monroe." Celeste offered the faintest of smiles. "No," she said, glancing around. "Not really." And she wasn't. She carried with her the names of dozens of others who had walked these same corridors. Same skin, same silence, same dismissal. But today, someone was finally watching back. Celeste Monroe had always believed in the power of systems, well-crafted ones, built on accountability and equity, not just function. That belief was, after all, the foundation of her work, her influence, her philanthropy. But in airports like this, where polished steel met whitewashed protocol, she was reminded time and again that systems, when built on bias, simply learned to hide their prejudice better. As she exited the biometric lounge, she walked past a row of sleek, frosted glass panels that separated general boarding from the priority access lane. A gold sign above read, "Priority 1A Business, Elite, Diplomatic, and Executive Class only." Her pass, of course, qualified her for all four. She joined the short line without hesitation. Two men in tailored suits ahead of her made casual conversation about bond markets. A woman behind her, scrolling through an iPad with nails painted in subtle chrome, gave no notice to her presence. All was silent, efficient, until it wasn't. A security agent approached the line with a clipboard and a badge that bore the Orion Airlines logo. He wasn't smiling. "Ma'am," he said softly but firmly, stopping at Celeste. "Could I ask you to step aside for a moment?" Celeste looked at him calmly. "Is there a problem?" The man glanced at her outfit, elegant, understated, and deliberately neutral. A sleeveless beige midi dress, paired with a gray shawl and modest heels. "I'm afraid our updated dress code for priority lanes now requires professional business attire," he said, eyes avoiding hers. "Jackets or sleeves are expected as part of the policy. No sleeveless were permitted in executive boarding areas." Celeste tilted her head slightly. That policy is not listed anywhere on your site, app, or boarding confirmation. The agent gave a rehearsed shrug. It's part of our internal updates for travel presentation standards, especially in shared lounges and premium lanes. Enforcement varies by terminal, but today we're applying it strictly. She wanted to smile, not out of amusement, but from recognition. This was the kind of rule that was never written until it needed to be enforced selectively. She opened her bag slowly and retrieved a soft cardigan, which she carried for air-conditioned lounges. As she slipped it on without protest, the agent hesitated, perhaps expecting confrontation. He received none. Celeste stepped back into the line with all the grace of someone who had worn armor her entire life, tailored to match every environment where she was not expected to belong. The line moved forward. The incident was over, but the message had landed. You don't quite fit here, even when you do. After clearing that checkpoint, she approached the next stage of pre-boarding. Biometric Verification 2.0, Orion's most lauded advancement in seamless identification. Designed to expedite clearance for global travelers, it used a combination of facial mapping, retina scanning, and gait history to grant direct access to high-security zones. A silver arch curved overhead like the entry to some futuristic portal. Just look forward, and the system will process automatically, the attendant said, not looking up from her tablet. Celeste complied, standing tall, gaze steady, hands at her sides. A soft chime echoed, then a red strobe flickered at the top corner of the arch. Verification pending, the system said. Secondary confirmation required. The attendant frowned, tapped her screen, then looked at Celeste for the first time. Strange. You were just cleared through phase 1, right? Celeste nodded once. Yes. Do you mind stepping into the side lane for manual override? Should only take a second. She knew it would take more than that. The side lane wasn't built for privacy. It was marked Supplemental ID Verification Tier 3 and lined with reflective panels and security monitors. Inside, a slim man in an Orion vest waited behind a glass console. Name, he asked. Celeste Monroe. Flight. Zurich. He typed slowly, scanning the data. It says here you've already cleared security, he said. Why'd you get flagged again? She gave no answer. He squinted. Probably a lighting error or facial mismatch. Happens with darker tones under bright LED, believe it or not. She did believe it. She had heard it before. He snapped her photo again, asked her to recite her address, verify her recent travel history, and show her boarding pass manually, even though it had already been scanned twice. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Celeste watched through the glass as passengers moved along the normal lanes with ease. No one else had been diverted. No one else had been questioned twice. No one else seemed to look like her. At minute 27, a supervisor arrived to revalidate the override code. He greeted the tech, not her, and asked without looking up, "This the Monroe verification?" "Yeah." She got flagged for double phase. "All right, just log it and release." There was no apology, no eye contact, just a code typed, a gate opened, and a quiet "you're good." She walked out without saying a word. The experience had cost her 40 minutes. But it wasn't the time that mattered. It was the pattern. At every stage, the system had claimed to be neutral, yet it always seemed to question her more, test her presence, doubt her identity, delay her passage, with just enough ambiguity to appear procedural. This was the new face of exclusion, not shouted, not physical, not overt, but written into the architecture of convenience, designed to seem fair while selecting its targets invisibly. Celeste knew that the real purpose of this phase wasn't just to verify identity. It was to observe reaction, resistance, tone. Would she protest? Would she challenge? Would she break the illusion of grace? But she didn't. She played her role perfectly, composed, cooperative, controlled. Because beneath it all, she wasn't just a passenger on a first-class ticket. She was a data point moving through a living experiment. And somewhere quietly, that data was being logged, not just by the system, but by her. The tablet in her bag recorded timestamps, sensor flags, facial match logs, and override codes. Every incident, every deviation, every delay, and though no one around her knew it yet, each entry in that log was a nail being driven, quietly, efficiently, into the structure she had come to dismantle from the inside. Celeste exited the supplemental verification area with her shoulders squared and her expression composed, though her breath had deepened ever so slightly. Every step away from that glass room felt like a quiet reclamation, as if she were reassembling pieces of herself that had been momentarily fractured, not by the procedure, but by the design of the procedure. The Orion First Class Lounge sat just past a pair of sound-dampened sliding doors, its glass panels glowing softly beneath recessed lighting. A uniformed host greeted her with a trained smile. Through her eyes betrayed a flicker of confusion. "Boarding pass, please," she said. Celeste handed it over. The scanner blinked, then turned green. 2A. Zurich. "Welcome," the host said quickly, stepping aside. The formality polished, but impersonal. Celeste entered the lounge and felt the temperature shift, not the room, but the atmosphere. Inside, the space was lined with travelers reclining in suede armchairs, sipping espresso or wine, their luggage polished, their voices low. Conversations murmured around stock options, mergers, ski homes in Gstaad. No one looked at her directly, but she felt the collective hesitation in the room, like a dissonant note in a well-rehearsed symphony. She selected a seat near the window and placed her tablet on the glass table, glancing briefly at the Zurich weather. 53 degrees, light snow, wind from the northeast. As she reached for the service call button to request the pre-flight vegan meal she'd pre-ordered through the app, a young attendant in a black vest approached from across the room. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, stopping beside her table. "We're currently serving the lounge menu to guests in boarding groups 1A through 3B. Your ticket list group 2A, which is within that range," she interrupted, calmly but firmly. He blinked, then checked the tablet in his hand. "It might be a system glitch," he offered, though he didn't look at the screen long enough to confirm. "Could you try the buffet?" he added, gesturing toward a smaller, secondary food station across the lounge. Celeste didn't argue. She simply nodded once and rose from her seat, walking with deliberate calm across the room. The buffet held a small selection of pre-packaged snacks, most containing gluten, dairy, or sodium-heavy preservatives. Not one item matched her medical profile or pre-ordered dietary restrictions. She returned to her seat without taking anything, her expression unreadable. Two guests seated nearby glanced her way, then quickly looked back at their phones. A few minutes later, a server with a tray approached a man 2 seats down, pale-skinned, mid-30s, designer laptop on his lap, and delivered a customized meal: quinoa bowl, grilled vegetables, and a bottle of still mineral water. The same meal Celeste had requested days ago. He hadn't pre-ordered. She heard him say, "Oh cool, I just asked for something clean and light." The attendant beamed. "We always try to accommodate." Celeste remained silent. The man didn't look her way, didn't notice her gaze. That was the point. She was not present enough to be acknowledged. Not disruptive, not problematic, simply invisible. She didn't want confrontation. She wanted confirmation. And she was getting it in volumes. She checked the time. Still 35 minutes before boarding. Enough time to finalize her seat adjustment. She approached the concierge desk within the lounge, where 2 agents were discussing rebookings for a delayed flight to Amsterdam. She waited patiently until they noticed her. "Yes," one of them asked, a tight smile in place. "I'd like to request a change from 2A to 2F if it's unoccupied," she said. "I have a chronic spinal issue and need easier access to stretch and shift posture during long-haul flights. A window seat helps." The agent typed briskly, then shook her head. "I'm afraid 2F is reserved." Celeste nodded. "Understood. Who holds a seat?" The agent paused. "It's blocked by our operations team. Possibly a VIP or business partner." Celeste gave a polite nod, then turned to return to her seat. She didn't question further. She didn't need to. When she finally boarded the aircraft, rolling her carry-on quietly behind her, she found her seat. 2A, clean and prepped. She stowed her tablet and settled in, adjusting her lumbar pillow with practiced grace. A few minutes later, a young man in his early 20s arrived, vlogging with his phone as he walked down the aisle. "Yo, guys, we are officially boarding first class, baby," he said, not exactly quietly. He slid into seat 2F, directly across from her, without hesitation. "First time ever flying like this. Shout out to the sponsor. Let's go." Celeste didn't look at him, but she heard everything. He wasn't a diplomat, not a business partner, not someone with a medical note or prearranged status. He was a content creator, and he had gotten the seat she'd been denied because he matched their expectation of who could be elevated, even without reason. As flight attendants moved through the cabin, greeting certain passengers by name, offering champagne or adjusting pillows, no one stopped at her seat. No one greeted her as Ms. Monroe. She wasn't denied. She was ignored. Quietly, professionally, deliberately. A glass of water was set in front of her without comment. She accepted it, placed it on her tray, and opened her tablet. The document she pulled up wasn't a book or a film. It was a live working file titled Phase 1 Observations, Passive Exclusion Protocols. She added 2 new entries. Then she paused, leaned her head back, and stared at the ceiling. Outside the window, the tarmac buzzed with motion. Inside, everything remained perfectly still. Too still. The hum of the aircraft's ventilation system provided a steady, sterile rhythm as Celeste settled into her seat in 2A. Her posture remained relaxed, her expression neutral, but inside, her focus sharpened. Every detail around her was a data point. The order in which passengers were greeted, the variation in tone depending on skin color or wardrobe, the way flight attendants walked past certain rows without stopping. She had already recorded 6 entries into her Phase 1 observation log before the flight had even begun taxiing. And as she prepared to tuck her bag beneath the seat in front of her, she noticed something odd. Her carry-on, the black leather one with the custom tag, wasn't there. She blinked once, slow and deliberate, then stood and opened the overhead bin. Nothing. The compartment was empty. She double-checked the neighboring bin. Still nothing. A few rows ahead, a crew member was assisting another passenger with their coat. Celeste stepped into the aisle and approached. "Excuse me," she said calmly. "My carry-on was in my hand when I boarded. It's no longer where I left it." The attendant raised her brows, visibly trying to recall. "Your seat. 2A." The woman glanced toward the back of the plane and then tapped her earpiece. "Let me check with ground support." Celeste returned to her seat and waited. 3 minutes passed, then 5. Finally, the woman reappeared. "It seems your bag was redirected to cargo hold storage," she explained, with a smile too rehearsed to be sincere. "Why?" Celeste asked, even though she already knew. "The overhead space near your seat had been flagged for priority clientele needing special accommodations," the woman said. "Someone from our pre-boarding team made the call to optimize placement." Celeste narrowed her eyes slightly. "Was I consulted?" "No, but, well, it happens sometimes. Bags get relocated when we need to maintain weight balance or cabin preference structures." Celeste didn't respond. Not yet. She nodded once, took out her tablet, and added, "Item number 7, personal carry-on, removed and rerouted without notice or consent. Justification attributed to ambiguous priority policy. Responsibility diffused no individual acknowledgement of action." She placed the tablet aside. The cabin doors had not yet closed. The flight had not yet pushed back. And the theater had not yet ended. Moments later, just as she leaned back in her seat again, a man approached from the boarding gate. He was tall, early 40s, dressed casually in khakis and a fitted black jacket. No name tag. No flight crew insignia. Just a lanyard tucked discreetly inside his jacket. He made direct eye contact with her and offered a nod that suggested familiarity, though she had never seen him before. "Ms. Monroe?" he asked softly. She paused. "Yes." He pulled a small notepad from his pocket, not digital, not formal, just enough to carry authority, without paperwork. "Do you have your ID handy again? We've had a minor alert at the pre-boarding scan. Nothing serious, just a match on facial recognition with a previous passenger incident." Celeste blinked once. "A match? "Yes, ma'am," he replied, lowering his voice. "It appears your image bears similarity to a subject flagged last year for noncompliance during boarding procedures in Los Angeles." "That's absurd," she said flatly. "I've never been flagged, nor flown through LAX in over 14 months." "I understand," he said quickly, "which is why we're verifying manually. Just a precaution. I assure you this is standard protocol." She handed him her government-issued ID, which he reviewed with exaggerated care. His eyes lingered on the expiration date, the address, the security hologram. He nodded, then held it up to the cabin light and angled it. "Just making sure our system didn't confuse similar profiles," he said, still avoiding any direct claim of error. "Out of curiosity," Celeste said, her voice as calm as glass, "was anyone else on this plane stopped for the same verification?" The man didn't answer. "Thank you for your cooperation," he offered instead, and walked off down the aisle without waiting for a reply. Celeste exhaled slowly, long and measured. Then she reopened her tablet and typed, "Item number 8, subjected to mid-boarding identity re-verification. Justification cited as facial similarity to unrelated passenger incident. No supporting evidence presented. Action executed by non-uniformed personnel with no official record or log acknowledgement." She didn't bother pretending to be rattled. She wasn't. But she understood the message with perfect clarity. You're not under attack. You're under review. Every gesture was curated to maintain plausible deniability. No one had accused her of anything. No one had used slurs or raised their voice. But they had made her presence conditional. Her seating was temporary. Her inclusion is negotiable. 20 minutes into boarding, a flight attendant returned and offered her a blanket and pillow. No eye contact, no smile, just a folded gesture, handed to her like a formality. Celeste accepted it without acknowledgement. The man across the aisle, the same young vlogger from earlier, was now chatting with another passenger about how free upgrades were way easier when you smiled at the gate staff. He hadn't been questioned, hadn't been flagged, hadn't lost his luggage. He had only gained. The plane began to taxi. Engines hummed to life. Celeste's tablet remained open in her lap, its screen filled with data she was now mentally matching with the patterns she'd uncovered over the past 6 months. Orion Airlines had passed its public audits. It was compiled on paper. But it had failed silently, in a language the law didn't speak. That's why she had come herself, not to accuse, but to observe. And today, the performance was flawless, almost too flawless. Celeste adjusted the seat back just slightly as the aircraft leveled off above the clouds, the hum of the engines smoothing into a steady rhythm. The cabin lights dimmed gently for the first meal service of the transatlantic flight, and flight attendants began their quiet choreography. Carts rolling, menus exchanged, preferences confirmed. The soft clink of metal utensils and porcelain trays created an atmosphere of elevated civility. The kind passengers paid thousands for. Celeste remained still, her seat upright, her tray table cleared and ready. She had confirmed her meal selection 4 days prior, gluten-free, low-sodium, plant-based. Not a preference, a medical necessity. Her autoimmunity protocol required consistency, and the airline's meal partner had assured accommodation was secured. A flight attendant approached her row with the cart, stopping at the passenger across the aisle, a woman in a navy blazer who laughed lightly as she received her grilled halibut with herb rice. Then came the passenger behind her, a man requesting a beef entree, which was delivered with a nod. Celeste was next. She offered a polite nod, hands folded, as the attendant glanced at the manifest. Her tray remained untouched. The attendant frowned, typed something into her handheld device, then looked at Celeste with mild confusion. "MS. Monroe?" she asked. "Yes," Celeste replied. "Your meal was marked as served during pre-departure. There's no remaining entry on the service queue." Celeste's eyes narrowed slightly. "Served. It's already listed in the log as completed. I never received anything." The attendant straightened. "It may have been a system mislabel. I'll check with the galley." She returned 5 minutes later, empty-handed. "Unfortunately, The special request meals are preloaded to match the manifest exactly, she explained. If it was marked as delivered, we can't issue a replacement. I'm sorry. Celeste inhaled slowly, letting the air settle deep in her chest. I need to file a formal complaint now, she said. The attendant hesitated. To do that, you'll need to complete Form 304.2, she said, opening a drawer beneath the service cart and handing her a folded, multi-page document printed in fine, pale gray font. It must be completed by hand and submitted at the ground services desk upon arrival. Celeste unfolded the paper. It was dense, formatted like a tax document, with tiny boxes for flight numbers, timestamps, personnel names, seat numbers, and internal codes she had no access to. Is there no digital option? She asked. Not for in-flight errors, the attendant replied. Company policy. Celeste nodded once and placed a form in her tablet case. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't protest. But she logged the moment with cold precision. Item number 9, pre-ordered medical meal marked as served before departure. No food delivered. Complaint mechanism intentionally obstructive, non-digital. Deferred to post-flight. No apology, no offer of alternatives. She had no intention of filling out that form, not because she wouldn't report it, but because she already had. Her foundation's real-time interface had already captured the service log discrepancy through a background channel embedded in her tablet's privacy software. Her silence wasn't accepted. It was an accumulation. 40 minutes later, with the cabin returning to a soft hum, the overhead speaker crackled unexpectedly. Ladies and gentlemen, may we have your attention for a brief announcement? A moment of static passed, then the crew's voice continued, oddly sharp against the gentle ambience of first class. Passenger Celeste Monroe, seated in 2A, please confirm that your carry-on item has been properly stowed and is not impeding any adjacent passenger space. We've received a courtesy report regarding obstruction. Heads turned subtly. Not everyone looked, but enough. Celeste's eyes moved slowly to the overhead bin, now empty. Her original bag had been taken to the cargo hold, unrequested, unacknowledged. There was no carry-on remaining in her immediate vicinity. She reached for the call button. A few seconds passed before a male flight attendant approached. Yes, ma'am. Would you mind confirming what bag is being referenced in the announcement just made? She asked. The man glanced at his tablet, then shook his head. It may have been an error. Sometimes the cabin announcements pull residual notes from prior legs. Nothing to worry about. That announcement was directed at me by name, she said. Errors don't include seat-specific identification without deliberate input. The attendant stiffened slightly, realizing the misstep. I'll look into it, ma'am, he said, and turned away quickly. She didn't stop him. What mattered wasn't whether the announcement had been a mistake. It was that it had been public. She had been singled out by name mid-flight over a supposed obstruction she could not physically have caused, and no one had intervened to correct it. The murmur returned briefly through the cabin, then faded again into the soft ambient noise. Celeste typed without looking. Item number 10, targeted announcement broadcast cabin-wide, falsely identifying passenger by name in relation to violation. No factual basis, no retraction issued. Likely psychological deterrent isolation tactic. She closed the tablet halfway, letting it rest on the tray table. The man across the aisle glanced at her, then quickly back to his phone. The woman 2 seats ahead offered a tight smile when they caught eyes, then buried herself in a paperback novel. It was subtle, but real. She had become the focus of suspicion, not through accusation, but through suggestion. The system had learned how to punish without leaving fingerprints. Instead of confrontation, it used compliance. Instead of hostility, it used forms. Instead of shouting, it used announcements. Vague enough to protect itself, specific enough to wound. Celeste leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, but to think. She had spent years designing frameworks to catch discrimination buried in process. Algorithms that could trace behavior patterns, intent disguised as error, bias structured into policy. Now, she was walking through the very minefield she had spent a lifetime mapping from above. And still, there was one more layer she hadn't yet seen. But it was coming. Celeste reopened her tablet slowly, the screen glowing back to life with its organized rows of observation entries and timestamps. She was meticulous in how she logged every incident, factual, objective, emotion removed. That was the only way to make the data stick when presented to federal oversight boards, when evidence had to outweigh perception. She wasn't here to feel offended. She was here to prove a system. Across the aisle, a man tapped away freely on a sleek MacBook Pro, watching a documentary with earbuds in. Ahead, two passengers discussed a merger deal in low voices while both toggled between spreadsheets and PowerPoint decks. Celeste tapped out a line of code that accessed an encrypted dashboard tracking behavioral compliance across airline partners, flagging policy inconsistencies through pattern recognition. The tool had been funded by her foundation, but discreetly field-tested under anonymous parameters. She was running the test live. The screen pulsed gently as real-time logs compiled beneath her fingertips. At that moment, a flight attendant, one she hadn't interacted with yet, approached with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She leaned slightly into Celeste's aisle and said in a voice just loud enough to carry, "Hi there. I couldn't help but notice you're working hard." Celeste looked up, fingers poised. "Yes. Just curious," the woman said lightly, tilting her head. "What do you do? Are you assisting one of the executives on board today? Like, are you part of someone's team?" The question was delivered with a tone of pleasant curiosity, as though she were genuinely trying to make small talk, but beneath it, Celeste heard it clearly. "You don't seem to be the primary passenger. You must be here on someone else's behalf." Celeste offered a small smile, polite but without warmth. "I work independently," she replied, "not as an assistant." "Oh, of course," the attendant said quickly, nodding. "I just thought, because we often get reps or support staff traveling with partners in this section. You just looked efficient." "Thank you," Celeste said, voice neutral. The attendant's smile froze for a half second. Then she moved along without further comment. Across the cabin, no one else was being asked what they did. No one else had to validate their right to be seated here by profession or affiliation. Celeste typed another entry. Item number 11, flight crew, engaged passenger in unsolicited inquiry regarding occupational role. Framed as small talk, but inferred subservient status. Question unprompted, unnecessary. Directed solely at black female passenger. 10 minutes passed. Celeste resumed work, tapping through documentation files, compiling audit trail reports to be sent later through secure servers. As she switched to her encryption module, the flight attendant from earlier reappeared, this time walking briskly and carrying a compliance clipboard. "Ms. Monroe," she said gently, "would you mind closing your laptop briefly?" Celeste looked up. "May I ask why?" "We've just been advised that certain devices not certified for in-cabin operation should be stowed temporarily. Your model doesn't appear on our pre-cleared list." Celeste raised an eyebrow. "This is a standard enterprise-grade ThinkPad, FCC and FAA certified. The same one used by several passengers on this plane, including the gentleman across from me." The attendant's eyes flicked briefly across the aisle, then back to Celeste. "Yes, but we received a cabin advisory targeting specific serial ranges. It's nothing personal, just a precaution." "Did anyone else receive the same request?" "Not to my knowledge. The alert may be localized." Celeste closed the laptop with calm precision and placed it in her lap. "I'd appreciate a copy of the advisory memo," she said, "for my records." The attendant hesitated. "I'll see if I can retrieve it." She walked away quickly, clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. Celeste didn't believe for a second that any such advisory existed. She reopened the tablet and typed. Item number 12, flight attendant instructed passenger to cease laptop use, citing unverified equipment advisory. No other passengers approached. Justification inconsistent. Likely pretext for disruption of professional activity. The irony did not escape her. In a cabin full of devices and data, it was hers, the one collecting oversight metrics, that had been singled out. Not confiscated, not forbidden, just gently discouraged. This was the signature move of elite discrimination. Doubt delivered politely. You didn't stop someone from speaking. You questioned the volume. You didn't remove them from a room. You asked them to check their credentials again. You didn't tell them they didn't belong. You asked them who they were here with. She stared out the window at the endless blue above the Atlantic. Clouds layered below like whispers of denial. This wasn't about rudeness or tone. It was about erosion. The slow chipping away of dignity, masked beneath the pleasant language of policy and procedure. She thought of the assistant she had trained back in Boston, a sharp young analyst who had once asked, "How do you know when a company is truly toxic?" Celeste had answered without hesitation, "When it learns how to make cruelty look like courtesy." That was what this airline had mastered. Not exclusion, but elegant erasure. A few rows ahead, a steward poured a glass of Bordeaux for a passenger who had been loud, demanding, and openly dismissive of staff earlier. No warnings, no corrections, just extra attention. Celeste folded her hands in her lap and steadied her breath. She had moved through the world long enough to recognize the performance of power. But what they hadn't recognized yet was that she wasn't here to play along. Celeste remained motionless in her seat, eyes on the soft condensation forming along the edge of the cabin window, while inside her mind, 1,000 calculations unfolded. Every minor slight, every veiled gesture, every carefully phrased microaggression had been weighed and categorized, not just emotionally but systematically. The entries logged in her encrypted tablet had been cross-referenced, time-stamped, and categorized across behavioral bias spectrums, all feeding into a protocol system she hadn't yet revealed to anyone on board. But that was about to change. As the flight moved into its midpoint, with most passengers lulled into a state of in-flight sedation, Celeste felt the familiar haptic pulse on the underside of her left wrist, a vibration pattern only one device could emit. She glanced down, casual yet precise, and read the short message that blinked across her smartwatch in crisp, encrypted code. Monroe Protocol Phase 1 activated. Behavioral tracking confirmed. Visual ID sync, 97.2%. Continue engagement. Remote audit now live. No one saw her reaction because she didn't have one. Her face remained still, unreadable, but her hand moved instinctively, gliding over the side of the watch, pressing her thumb to the center sensor with the practiced elegance of someone who had rehearsed this moment dozens of times. A soft green ring circled the watch face, then disappeared. The signal had been authenticated. Phase 2 was ready. What no one on this flight knew, not the flight attendants, not the passengers, not even the pilot, was that Celeste Monroe didn't just fund civil rights watchdog programs. She architected them through a network of private equity channels, anonymous partnerships, and nonprofit arms of her foundation. She had been quietly backing the development of ethical compliance infrastructure in the aviation industry for over 5 years. Today was not her first field test, but it was the first time the target had been this visible, this arrogant, and this consistent. She opened her tablet again, though now it was no longer a passive record. The top left corner blinked with a new icon, an interlinked node connecting her to 3 secure lines: the Department of Transportation's Office of Aviation Oversight, the FAA's Internal Ethics Review Board, and the Civil Equity Alliance's Anonymous Audit Channel. All 3 channels had been built on systems she'd funded, systems she had direct override access to. With a swipe, she opened a mirrored screen, displaying live biometric logs from the flight's cabin sensors. Infrared gate recognition, face-to-face interaction timing, service frequency distribution, all lined up in real time. The algorithm confirmed what she already knew. Her treatment had statistically deviated from the norm by 48.6%. No other first-class passenger had experienced a similar pattern of delay, denial, or deference. She tapped another icon and activated voice encryption. "Confirm Monroe Protocol Phase 2, she said softly. The response came almost instantly in a voice-filtered tone. "Phase 2 live. Data capture locked. Initiate escalation tier when ready." She didn't respond aloud. Instead, she turned off the cabin light above her seat and allowed herself to sit back, physically still, strategically advancing. Every action from here on would ripple outward. The silence she had carried wasn't surrender. It was setup. A few rows behind her, a flight attendant poured a third glass of wine for a businessman who had earlier been overheard referring to her as that assistant lady. The man never made eye contact with her. He didn't have to. His assumptions spoke louder than words. But Celeste didn't look at him either. She wasn't there to change his opinion. She was there to change the system that empowered it. The device on her wrist buzzed again, this time with an incoming secure ping. A second message displayed. DOT Oversight Office reviewing live data. FAA ethics trigger threshold surpassed. External review team alerted. Phase 3 available on command. Celeste closed her eyes, not from exhaustion, but from calculation. She had expected it would take longer for the system to reach trigger thresholds. But the flight had been generous with evidence. Too generous. The arrogance of unchecked bias had made her job easier. That arrogance had operated under the assumption that she was alone, unarmed, and unaware. It hadn't accounted for her being the one who helped design the weapons of audit in the first place. She placed a fingertip on the side bezel of her watch and opened a secondary channel. This one linked to her legal liaison at a compliance firm specializing in federal transport equity. She didn't speak, just uploaded the preliminary report with the tag, Live Orion 447/target. Monroe. The upload bar filled quickly. No sound, no theatrics, just precision. Then, without lifting her head, she initiated a silent ping to a third agency, the Civil Equity Alliance, where her foundation held not only majority funding power, but also board vote rights on active investigations. The signal triggered a flag in their triage system. Level 3 engagement. Mid-flight racial discrimination case, real-time compliance breach confirmed by passive metrics. Awaiting subject confirmation for next steps. Celeste didn't need to answer yet, but the screen blinked, ready. The power dynamic had shifted, not with fanfare, but with code. She didn't need to speak louder. She just needed to activate the mechanism that would finally speak for her. And it was already listening. Celeste kept her gaze fixed on the tablet screen as her encrypted dashboard updated with pulsing lines of data. But behind those clean visuals, a cascade had begun, a series of silent ruptures triggered by her activation. The cabin around her still moved as if nothing had changed. Flight attendants adjusted blankets, refilled champagne, and asked passengers if they preferred tea or coffee with dessert. Yet far above them, across encrypted satellite channels and buried deep within national regulatory systems, the balance of power was already shifting. A priority message arrived at FAA Ethics Command via the Phase 2 portal she had just opened, triggering the automatic notification clause linked to Monroe Tier Protocol. Civil Bias Index exceeded. Initiate regulatory alert for elevated risk entity status. Flag Orion Airlines. Simultaneously, a mirrored signal hit the Department of Transportation's oversight unit in Washington, prompting the generation of a preliminary risk profile for Orion. It took less than 6 minutes for the internal ranking to shift from Standard Monitor to Class 3 concern, probable systemic ethics violation. From there, it escalated faster than even Celeste expected. In a sleek boardroom 10 time zones away, the CEO of Orion Airlines, Ethan Wallace, was mid-conference with potential investors when his assistant entered the room with pale knuckles and a tablet gripped so tightly her fingers trembled. "You need to see this," she whispered. He frowned, annoyed at the interruption, until he saw the subject line pulsing across the encrypted header. Notice of elevated risk. Civil Equity Authority Assessment Immediate Review required. Ethan swiped to open it. The screen displayed a formal report drafted in real time. Preliminary Ethics Violation Assessment, Orion Airlines. Primary trigger. Passenger complaint data aligned with in-flight behavioral biometrics. Source: Monroe Protocol. The last name hit him hard. He knew the Monroe Foundation. Everyone in high-level aviation knew it. They were not just donors, they were funders of entire compliance infrastructures, the kind that underpinned federal transport partnerships and sustainability certifications. The kind of backers you didn't want on the other side of an ethics review. He tapped into the executive channel and demanded a risk analysis report. Within moments, the truth became undeniable. Multiple anomalies had been flagged by the same protocol system they had once quietly agreed to comply with in theory, never believing it would be activated from within one of their own cabins. The internal dashboard displayed the chilling phrase, Risk Index, 92% designated high concern entity under Section 4.9C discrimination metrics threshold surpassed. For Ethan Wallace, it was no longer about perception. It was now official. His airline was being reclassified, not as a victim of misunderstanding, but as a liability to the federal infrastructure they depended on. Back on board, the cabin lighting softened again, and an unusually senior-looking flight attendant approached Celeste, posture tighter than necessary, tone rehearsed to be pleasant but forced. "Ms. Monroe," she said carefully, "we'd like to invite you to a more private suite for the remainder of the flight. It's a special section we rarely open, but under the circumstances, we felt it appropriate. We'd also like to personally apologize for any inconsistencies you've experienced." Celeste did not look up immediately. She closed the tablet, placed it neatly into her bag, then met the woman's eyes with a calm that cut deeper than anger ever could. "No need for privacy," she said softly. "Not anymore." The attendant flinched ever so slightly, not in fear, but in the discomfort of realizing that the illusion had shattered. "Still," she added, "the cabin is quieter. We've made sure it's fully stocked. And of course, you'll have priority disembarkation." Celeste stood, gathering her things, not because she was yielding, but because she wanted to see what their version of an apology looked like when they had something to lose. As she followed the attendant to the front of the aircraft, passengers instinctively watched her. Not out of hostility, not yet, but with curiosity. Her presence now commanded weight. The very same posture they had dismissed hours ago had become a center of gravity none of them could define. In the secluded cabin, the seat was larger, the lighting warmer, the air somehow more still. But Celeste remained standing as the attendant gestured toward the plush chair. "You're welcome to get comfortable, Ms. Monroe," she said. Celeste turned slowly, letting her voice fill the space with a quiet clarity that demanded no reply. "This," she said, gesturing toward the space, "was never about comfort." The attendant hesitated, unsure how to respond. "It's about visibility," Celeste continued, "and how quickly people like me are made invisible in places like this." The woman swallowed hard. "On behalf of Orion Airlines, we sincerely regret." Celeste raised a hand. "Stop." The attendant froze. "This was never about me," Celeste said calmly. "It's about the hundreds of people like me who've been erased quietly, one policy at a time, one stare at a time, one miscommunication at a time. And you've built a system that rewards that erasure." She paused. "You just didn't expect one of us to be watching from the inside." The woman nodded faintly, almost retreating. Celeste took the seat, pulled her tablet back out, and reconnected to the secure channel. On screen, her legal counsel had already acknowledged receipt of the data package. A timestamp blinked beneath it. "Federal compliance review begins 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Press briefing window confirmed." The aircraft rumbled softly beneath her feet, engines steady at cruise altitude. But outside the walls of that cabin, beyond the seats and the fake smiles and the whispered apologies, the framework that had allowed this culture to thrive was beginning to crack. Not because Celeste had asked for fairness, but because she had redefined the terms entirely. The transition from polite apology to institutional reckoning began with silence. Not the silence of passengers or crew, but the kind that echoed inside boardrooms and compliance offices when systems once thought untouchable were finally pierced by consequence. Celeste remained in her upgraded suite, not because she accepted their gesture, but because it had become the clearest vantage point for watching the structure unravel. Her secure dashboard was still open, syncing live with 3 regulatory nodes that fed in constant alerts, each one tracing impact backwards, identifying not only violations, but the individuals responsible for maintaining the illusion of legitimacy. That was the true beauty of the Monroe Protocol. It didn't just record discrimination, it traced the roots of it. And at 34,000 feet, the digital vines had already reached the first terminal point. The Civil Equity Alliance's compliance AI pinged red as it completed a deep scan of internal Orion case history and flag handling, specifically targeting the employee accounts tied to delayed resolutions and removed incident logs. A name blinked on screen: Chloe Morgan, Incident Triage Lead, Domestic Hub Number 3. A 12-month behavioral audit attached to her profile displayed damning evidence: 14 customer-submitted reports related to racial profiling, all from verified accounts, all time-stamped, all matching standard policy breach criteria, and all manually removed from the system within 48 hours of submission, without escalation, follow-up, or closure notes. The pattern was not just clear. It was surgically consistent. Chloe's override tags bore the same metadata. The system flagged her profile for immediate suspension pending ethics investigation. The notification went out internally to the Orion HR oversight team at 4:12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, causing a disruption mid-shift in their Houston branch. Chloe had been responding to a routine inquiry about gate operations when her screen blinked and logged her out of all internal systems. Within minutes, her supervisor arrived in person, visibly uncomfortable. "You're being placed on administrative leave," he said flatly, pending formal inquiry into record manipulation and procedural noncompliance. Chloe tried to object, but the evidence was already being reviewed by the FAA's Independent Monitoring Committee. It didn't matter what she said. The audit trail was too clean, too damning, and too automatic. Celeste didn't know Chloe personally, but she had encountered her work in the form of silence. Silence that buried voices like hers before they ever reached daylight. Across the country, another internal review had triggered the protocol's second chain. At Orion's flagship terminal in Chicago, an employee named Kelsey Yates sat reviewing onboarding applications at a customer service kiosk when she received an alert requesting her to re-verify her completion of the racial equity and implicit bias prevention certification required of all lead desk agents. The system had pulled her digital certificate, flagged it for audit, and ran a background server verification of all training access timestamps. What it found was simple. She had never opened the training module. Her file showed a digitally signed confirmation, time-stamped and IP logged. But the playback log was blank. 0 engagement, 0 module clicks, 0 comprehension hours. Kelsey had certified herself without completing a second of training. Her screen froze. Then a pop-up appeared. Certification invalid. Audit notification initiated. Please await supervisor intervention. Kelsey stood up, confused, just as her supervisor approached and motioned for her to step into the back office. No accusations, just procedure. The same procedure that had been weaponized so quietly against passengers like Celeste was now redirecting its force internally, one badge at a time. Celeste read the updates as they came in, each marked with an encrypted tag and internal ID. She didn't react emotionally. These weren't personal victories. They were systemic recalibrations. She tapped another tab on her dashboard, reviewing the full list of employees whose accounts had interacted with her passenger file in the past 48 hours. A cluster of names had accessed her profile unnecessarily, toggled her priority tier, or rerouted her seat assignment. Each was now under review. Each left behind a trail. Bias wasn't a ghost. It had fingerprints. And the system, once activated, had been taught to detect every one of them. Meanwhile, the public relations team at Orion was scrambling. Word of a Monroe Tier protocol activation had leaked through insider channels, sparking panic calls between communication staff and executive assistants. The phrase "risk of federal declassification" began circulating on internal chat threads, referring to Orion's coveted ESG-certified carrier status. Without it, their government contracts, investor partnerships, and environmental subsidies would evaporate. No press statement had been released yet, but that hadn't stopped legal from triaging fallout. The same digital trail that led to Chloe and Kelsey was growing, one silent employee action at a time. Every skipped form, every reassigned ticket, every deletion made out of convenience or contempt now lived in the system forever. And Celeste, seated calmly in her suite, was watching all of it unfold, not with vengeance, but with the unwavering resolve of someone who no longer needed to ask for accountability. She had built the mechanism that delivered it. Celeste watched the final sequence unfold with the quiet precision of someone who had long since stopped hoping for change and started engineering it. The live dashboard on her tablet had become a digital crescendo of consequences, names being flagged, clearances being revoked, systems auto-locking one by one like trapdoors, falling shut beneath the feet of those who thought they were untouchable. And yet, the plane moved forward as though nothing was happening. The attendants still served decaf lattes, still offered extra pillows, still walked the aisles with the same empty courtesy, unaware that the very company they worked for was, in real time, losing its institutional spine. At 6:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, her legal team pushed the final lever, a public announcement from the Monroe Foundation, delivered through a coordinated drop across all federal contracting agencies, transportation equity partners, and ESG regulatory coalitions. The message was brief, clinical, and irreversible. Effective immediately, the Monroe Foundation is suspending all ESG alignment support, infrastructure funding, and transportation equity grants to Orion Airlines. Reason: breach of ethical compliance, sustained patterns of racial bias, obstruction of accountability. Full findings submitted to DOT and FTC. Within minutes, the Department of Transportation issued a secondary alert to federal contracting officers nationwide, triggering an automatic review hold on all active and pending government contracts with Orion. The airline's ESG rating dropped from certified to pending disqualification. Financial partners began pulling projections. News outlets were pinged with pre-drafted statements prepared by Celeste Communications firm weeks earlier, anticipating this outcome. Orion stock dipped 6 points in the first hour. It wouldn't recover. In a secure wing of the Capitol, the House Subcommittee on Transportation Oversight had already pivoted their weekly agenda. An emergency hearing had been scheduled for Orion's senior leadership to respond to the federal classification alert. The timing was poetic. No press, no applause, just fluorescent lights, hard chairs, and a long row of blank-eyed lawmakers preparing to dig into the question that had been ignored for far too long. How many times does a system need to fail before we stop calling it a mistake? At the head of the hearing table, CEO Ethan Wallace sat stiffly in a charcoal suit, his expression hollow, his voice shaking as he read the opening lines of his statement. "We are here today to acknowledge a breach in operational ethics," he began, hands trembling slightly above the paper. "The events involving MS Celeste Monroe reflect not only a failure of policy, but a culture of silent tolerance, where subtle exclusions were treated as acceptable, and where internal bias was allowed to masquerade as standard procedure." He paused, visibly struggling to continue. Cameras captured every moment. Behind him, aides looked away. Across the table, one congresswoman leaned forward. "Mr. Wallace, when did you realize this was more than just a customer complaint?" He hesitated. "When we were flagged as a federal liability," he answered. "And when our oversight systems revealed we weren't facing a PR issue. We were facing proof." She nodded slowly. "And who is Celeste Monroe to your company now?" Wallace exhaled, defeated. "We thought she was just another passenger. But she wasn't. She was the reality our system was built to overlook. And she didn't raise her voice. She just made sure we couldn't ignore hers anymore." Back in Zurich, the international press carried the story without embellishment. Headlines read like eulogies for a corporate giant. Orion Airlines loses federal contracts after racial bias scandal, and one passenger triggered the collapse of a quiet empire. But for Celeste, there was no victory lap. She gave no interviews, made no personal statements. Her presence had been her protest. Her precision had been her answer. And her silence had spoken louder than the entire system's defense. The final data sync on her dashboard showed full protocol completion. No further action required. Her job was never to shout at the gates of injustice. It was to unbolt them from within. The following week, 3 more airlines initiated emergency audits. 4 board members across separate corporations resigned. The FAA introduced new training requirements co-authored by the Monroe Foundation. A new oversight unit was formed, one with subpoena power and digital enforcement capability. And Celeste, now back in motion across oceans, carried nothing visible of the storm she had unleashed, only a tablet in her bag, a watch on her wrist, and the calm of someone who had already seen the end game and written it herself. If this story moved you or made you think, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. What moment hit you the hardest, and why? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from.